So the purpose of this video is to talk about how to win a bidding war. So the first thing I want to say is congratulations. Why am I congratulating you when you're in a bidding war, you may ask? Well, the reason is because you are buying a house or a property that's very desirable. It's so desirable that other people want to buy it also. So from a mindset perspective, a lot of people look at bidding wars as a negative thing. I don't. I look at bidding wars as a positive thing. Why? Because other people want to buy the same property. So when you go to sell it one day, there's a good likelihood that other people want to buy it as well. And you may have another bidding war when you sell the property. So what's better? Purchasing a property that other people are interested in, or buying a property that's been sitting on the market for 3 years? I'd rather have the property that other people want. So let's just approach this with that mindset. Now, when it comes to a bidding war, we have to understand that we're going to be competing against other people. So what we want to do in order to put us in a position to win is think about this from the seller's perspective. As a seller, why would I want to pick your offer over other offers? So when it comes to an offer in general, there's 5 major factors that come into an offer. The first one is price. Then there's the inspection contingency. There's the appraisal contingency. There's the overall mortgage contingency. And there's the timeline and ease of closing. So those are the 5 factors that we can play with when we put together our offer. The easiest ones to come up with are price and the timing of the closing. And the reason why is because I can just reach out to the other agent, to the listing agent, and ask them, what's the ideal closing date for the seller? And that's what I'm gonna do. So once we are armed with that information, we're gonna structure our offer around that. And it may be an exact date or it may be a range. The seller may say, well, we want to close in 60 to 90 days because we haven't found our home yet. And so we would write that in our offer that we're flexible on the closing. Or the seller may say we want to rent back the property for 30 to 60 days after closing. They want the funds now, but then they want to rent it back. So we would structure that in our offer. So that timeline is very easy to come up with. As far as the price goes, I'm going to put together a comprehensive market analysis to value the property, because a list price is just a price on a piece of paper. A property could be overpriced, underpriced, or priced right. So we want to look at the data to come up with what the property is actually worth. Now, as a tactic, what I like to do typically is find a round number that we want to offer, but then add $1,000 or $2,000 to it, because the difference between our offer and another offer and ours getting accepted could be that $2,000. If all the other things are equal, that really may come into play, and it has in the past. So those are the first 2 things we discussed. Now the other 3 things are the inspection contingency, the appraisal, and the mortgage contingency. If you're in a situation where you could purchase the property in cash, but you don't want to, and you still want to get a mortgage, I would recommend that you consider waiving the mortgage contingency. Now, what that's gonna mean to a seller is that they don't have to wait for you to get approved for the loan. They don't have to worry about you losing your job last minute. And this is gonna make you look very strong and equal to a cash buyer if you were able to do it. The odds of you actually closing in cash without a mortgage are very low, because you're gonna go through the mortgage process and you're gonna go through it as quick as possible. And even if the property underappraises, and we'll get to that point, you'll still get a mortgage of some sort. So we can speak to that in a call or a meeting, but that is what I would recommend if you're a very heavy down payment buyer, or you can afford to buy the property in cash. If that's not you, that's fine. Let's talk about the rest. So the home inspection. The purpose of a home inspection is to identify all the major issues with the property. And there's a slew of home inspections you can have. There's a general home inspection, and there's other supplementary ones such as an oil tank sweep, environmental inspection, termite inspection, radon test, and there's a host of others that we can have depending on the property and the dynamics of it, the age of the property, and everything like that. So what we want to do, ideally, if we're against multiple offers and we're in a heavy bidding war situation, is we want to limit the scope of the home inspection, because that's going to make the seller want to choose us because we're the simplest path to closing. If we have a full home inspection contingency, that means we'll be able to go in, identify any issues, and be able to just cancel the deal. And so sellers don't really want to see that, especially when they don't have to. We have ways of limiting the home inspection contingency. One way is we can limit it financially. We can say that we will only come after anything that comes up in the inspection report over X dollars. So for example, we can say we're gonna limit the home inspection to anything over the first $5,000 of items found in the inspection. So basically what that says is, as a buyer, you're not trying to nitpick with the seller. Everything that's under the first $5,000, you're gonna take care of yourself, not a big deal. But anything above and beyond that, you have a right to come after the seller. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is we can limit the inspection to certain things. So for example, what I very commonly see is the inspection is limited to structural and environmental issues only. What that means is the property is A, not gonna fall apart structurally, and B, there's no environmental issues. Examples would be an oil tank that's buried underground, asbestos that's found on the property, lead that's found on the property, or any other mold or contaminant that's found on the property. If we limit it to those major things, then you have the majors covered. Outside of that, if there's a mechanical issue, plumbing, electrical, windows, anything else, then it would be your responsibility as a buyer, and you have to be willing to accept that risk in this scenario. You could also limit it to structural, environmental, mechanical, or we could specify certain things. We could add roof to that. If there's a pool, we may add the pool to that list. But that's what people are commonly doing, is they're limiting their inspections. In extreme situations, just environmental, but usually it's structural and environmental issues only. Okay, so those are a couple of ways we can play with the inspection contingency, and when we talk after you watch this video, we'll go over the best strategy for this property. And then the next thing is the appraisal contingency. So if you're tight with cash, and if you're putting down a low down payment, you may not have wiggle room to play with this appraisal contingency. However, if you're putting down a large down payment, especially over 20%, then we can typically make adjustments to limit the exposure that the seller has and to make us more likely to be chosen as the buyer. When a seller's selling a property, and let's pretend it's $1 million, the bank is going to send an independent third party to come in and value the property. They want to make sure that the property that they're lending on is actually worth what they're about to give in terms of a loan. Now, the important thing with this is the bank cares about the lower of the purchase price or the appraised value, the lower of the two. So if you're purchasing a property for $1 million and it appraises at $850,000 and you're borrowing 80% of that, the bank is gonna say, okay, well, the property appraised at $850,000, we're gonna lend 80% of that to you. And if you wanna proceed with the purchase, you have to make up the difference in cash. If you're equipped to do that, and if you have a lot of cash, then we can do that and we can waive the full or part of the appraisal contingency. If you don't have the extra cash to do that, then it's not worth the risk. Now, if the property is selling for $1 million and it appraises for 1.2 million, great, you have no issue. As long as it appraises at or above the price you're purchasing it at, that's an ideal scenario. But in the case it underappraises, the seller wants to know what's gonna happen. And in a standard contract, if we don't make any adjustments to this contingency, if it underappraises, you'll be able to just back out unless the seller comes down to that price. Purchasing at $1 million, it appraises at 900, you can just back out. So a couple ways we can limit the exposure for the seller and make them likely to choose us. If we have a conversation, you tell me you're putting down $100,000 on a property, but you have an extra 50 grand set aside that you are okay to play with. What we can say is, if we're buying it for $1 million, that we're willing to purchase the property for $50,000 over the appraised value and up to $1 million. Now, what that tells the seller is right away, if it appraises at $925, my buyer is prepared to pay $975 for it. They're paying $50,000 over the appraised value. And so that limits the downward exposure for the seller, that they know that if it appraises for less, you're at least willing to buy it for $50,000 more. It may be $100,000, $200,000, whatever you're comfortable with financially to come up with. This is a big deal, and this is a big reason why our offers get chosen over others. We need to have a conversation to understand your cash position, and then this way I can advise you on what the best is. So again, just to recap, 5 major factors when it comes to these bidding wars: price, inspection terms, appraisal terms, mortgage contingency in general, and closing date, closing timeline, closing flexibility, all around the closing date for the sellers. So those are all the factors that we're gonna talk about when we have our conversation, but I want you to have a background and be prepared before we talk next on what we're able to do to help us win. So I look forward to talking to you, and let's get ready to get this house.